So let's move on to episode 9, Why We Fight, which I think it's right to say that this is my favorite episode. I know I said Bastogne might be my favorite episode, but this one is just amazing. The story finally concentrates on Captain Nixon. Like everyone else, I wanted to finally see an episode about this guy, and at last they gave it to him. Easy Company has crossed into Germany, and the war is winding down. You can tell that it's a whole new environment for them. Paratroopers are having sex with locals, they're stealing civilians' valuables, and doing whatever the hell they want. Captain Nixon is getting fed up with his job. This episode shows the vices he has, which is mainly being an alcoholic. I can't blame him though. For everything he's been through, he hasn't accomplished that much.
You're probably the only man in the 101st with 3 combat stars over his jump wings.
Not bad for someone who's never fired his weapon in combat, huh?
His drop into Germany didn't go according to plan.
Took a direct hit over the drop zone. I got out, 2 others got out.
The rest of the boys?
Well, they blew up over Germany somewhere. Boom.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
About what?
Well, tough situation.
Oh,
for
yeah,
you.
the boys. Yeah, it's terrible. Oh, well, it wasn't me.
It shows that even though the war is dying down, there isn't any satisfaction in it.
What do you think I should write to these parents, Dick?
You tell them what you always tell them. Their sons died as heroes.
You really still believe that?
All Nixon does is complain and look for VAT 69 whiskey. Things get really bad for him when he receives a letter from his wife telling him that she's divorcing him and taking everything.
She's taking everything. She's taking the house, taking the kid, she's taking the dog. It's not even her dog. It's my dog! She's taking my dog!
Poor Nixon. I feel real bad for him. He's not a bad guy, he just got problems like everyone. There's an interesting scene when he breaks into a woman's house and finds out that her husband was a German officer and was killed. It's sad and makes you realize the full picture of war. Easy Company is sent deep into German countryside, and everybody is so happy that the war is ending. They're singing and making plans for their post-war lives, but Nixon is miserable. The men just keep going and going further into Germany. They start to wonder why they're being sent out there.
Dragging our asses halfway around the world. Interrupting our lives for what? You ignorant, servile scum! What the fuck are we doing here? Huh?
Well, while the men are on a patrol, they eventually come across something that will be etched into people's minds forever.
Hey, doing this? Sir, we found something. We on a patrol, and, we came across this.
What? Frank, what is it?
I don't know, sir. I don't know.
It's revealed as a mystery. Nobody really knows what the hell this place is. It's an abandoned death camp full of dying Jews, Poles, and Gypsies. Winters has no idea what to think of this. Why is this here? What is it? Everyone today knows what the Holocaust is. That's what most people think of when they think World War II. But you have to understand the situation back then. Death camps and concentration camps weren't something the Nazis showed to the world or even to the general public. Yeah, there were rumors that this sort of thing was happening, but not nearly to this extent. So when Easy Company opens this abandoned camp, they're clueless. They don't know what this is. At first, they think it might be a prison for the most dangerous criminals. Liebgott questions one of the prisoners.
Nein.
No.
Ärzte, Musiker, Beamte, Bauern,
Doctors, musicians,
Schreiber, Schneider,
tailors,
Intellektuelle,
clerks, farmers, intellectuals, I mean normal people.
Juden.
The Jews.
Polen, Zigeuner.
Polish and gypsies.
They finally realize where they are and what the situation is. It's awful. The camp is full of skinny corpses, and I mean piles of them. It looks like the famous photographs taken during the liberations. A really sad part is when they start feeding the prisoners, but they inform them that they can't feed them too quickly, so they have to lock them back into the camp. When the episode starts, it kind of underestimates and downplays the Germans, saying, yeah, they're just a bunch of morons who couldn't fight a war.
It seems that the Germans are bad. Very bad. You don't say.
Hey, Frank, this guy's reading an article over here that says the Germans are bad.
But when they reached the abandoned camp, they realized that the Nazis weren't messing around. This was some serious stuff. Not like they didn't take the war seriously before, but once they got to these camps, it kind of widened the picture, and they realized that Nazi Germany wasn't just some little enemy. At the end of the episode, they make all the German civilians clean up the dead bodies in the camp. It's cruel, but understandable. They need to see what their leaders were doing to their country. They had to realize that Hitler and his party were turning their country into a living hell without them knowing. The last line of the episode is the best in the whole show.
Hitler's dead.
Holy shit.
Shot himself in Berlin.
Is the war over, sir?
No. We have orders to Berchtesgaden, and we're gonna move out 1 hour.
Should have killed himself 3 years ago. Saved us a lot of trouble.
Yeah, he should have. But he didn't.
That was a great way to end the episode. He should have killed himself. It would have prevented all this death, murder, and suffering from happening. But he didn't. And now we have to live with it. Great episode. It has to be my favorite. And now for the final episode, Points, which goes back to Winter's point of view. All I can say about this one is that it's pretty good. It's not like the Pacific where the last episode was the best, but I still thought it was good. Germany is basically done for, and Easy Company is just hanging around enjoying the luxury. Of course the question comes up, what do you do after you're discharged? Nixon gives Winters a job offer to come work for him in New Jersey. Once Easy Company seizes the Wolf's Lair in Bavaria, the German army surrenders. So the war in Europe is over. Every time I see this episode, I can't get over the view from the Wolf's Lair. Look at that, it's incredible! And as a VE present, Winters leads Nixon into Hermann Goering's house, where he has more alcohol than the largest winery. I bet to Nixon, this was paradise. Then the company moves into Austria, where the scenery is even more amazing. I like how it shows that they're sort of on good terms with the Germans now, or going to be at least. Yeah, this is by far the most uplifting episode, showing that they're in paradise and the war is over. But things start to get a little uneasy. The reason why this episode is called Points is because the military has this system based on medals and accommodations that gives you a certain amount of points and you get a ticket home. But most of the men just simply don't have that many medals and accommodations, so they're stuck in the airborne. The Pacific War becomes a big topic. The Japanese haven't surrendered yet, so they start training Easy Company to go to war with Japan. Liebgott decides to avenge the Jews he found in Germany and tracks down an Austrian who was involved with the concentration camps. They murder him. Private Genovic dies in a jeep accident, something that could have been easily avoided. There's also a huge incident where some drunk replacement murders a German officer and a British officer. Grant tries to stop him from taking off, but he shoots him right in the head. Thankfully, Spears finds a brain surgeon to operate on Grant, and he actually lives. The men find the drunk replacement and beat the hell out of him. When Spears comes in, he's about ready to shoot him but brings himself to resist the urge. So the episode shows you that because they're not at war anymore, the men have way too much alcohol, weapons, and time on their hands. Even though this episode isn't one of my favorites, it has one of the best endings to any war film ever. But it's only great if you watch every episode before it. In my opinion, it has 2 endings. I know that doesn't make any sense, but bear with me. Winters, Nixon, and Lipton are approached by a German general who wants to address his company.
With your permission, I would like to address my men briefly.
That'll be fine, General.
Then he stands in front of them and gives a speech. Liebgott, who speaks German, interprets the speech for Winters and Nixon. This was the best way to end the whole show. Just watch.
Es war ein langer Krieg. Es war ein harter Krieg.
Liebgott?
Man, it's been a long war, it's been a tough war.
Ihr habt tapfer und stolz für euer Vaterland gekämpft.
You fought bravely, proudly for your country.
Ihr seid eine ganz besondere Truppe,
You are a special group.
die ineinander einen Zusammenhalt gefunden hat.
You found in one another a bond.
wie sich nur im Kampf entwickeln kann.
It exists only in combat.
Unter Kameraden,
Among brothers
die Fuchshöhlen geteilt haben,
who've shared foxholes.
die sich in schrecklichen Momenten gegenseitig gestützt haben,
Held each other in dire moments.
die den Tod zusammen gesehen haben und gemeinsam gelitten haben.
Who've seen death and suffered together.
Ich bin stolz, mit euch gedient zu haben.
I'm proud to have served with each and every one of you.
Sie alle verdienen ein langes und glückliches Leben in Frieden.
You deserve long and happy lives in peace.
You couldn't have ended the show any way better than this. You view the Germans as the enemy, the villains, all throughout the show, but when it comes full circle, you realize they're not so different than them. These are not monsters or cartoon characters. They're good men. Like I've said, you have to realize the full picture of war and understand that good and evil fights on both sides. And I love how they did it with the German general's speech. So that was the first ending. The second ending directly after that speech shows all members of Easy Company playing a baseball game. Winters narrates telling us what happened to all the men after the war, the lives they lived and the careers they took, and Winters rounds up his men for one final announcement.
This morning, President Truman received the unconditional surrender from the Japanese. War's over.
It's a good ending that leaves you feeling positive knowing that peacetime is ahead. The men would be moving on to new and better lives, making the world a better place for the future. In a way, their lives had just begun.
Each of us would be forever connected by our shared experience. And each would have to rejoin the world as best he could. I stayed around Hershey, Pennsylvania, finally finding a little farm, a little peaceful corner of the world, where I still live today. There is not a day that goes by that I do not think of the men I served with, who never got to enjoy the world without war.
And that's Band of Brothers, the epic World War II miniseries from HBO. I love it. The episodes never get old. You can watch them over and over again and you'll still learn new things. I went over it as briefly as I could, so I didn't even touch on half the characters and stories that it has. I guess it's a little too epic. When it comes to Band of Brothers and the Pacific, it's extremely hard for me to decide which one I like better. It's apples and oranges. They're completely different from each other. When the Pacific came out, a lot of people didn't really like it because it wasn't anything like Band of Brothers, and they were expecting that it was going to be just like it. You have to take the Pacific as its own series. Forget about Band of Brothers when you're watching it. I like some of the things more in the Pacific than I did in Band of Brothers. The Pacific branches out a little more. We see what life back home was like. The Pacific was also more dramatic, showing much more brutal and emotional sides of the war. Now don't get me wrong, Band of Brothers has plenty of brutal and gory moments, but I think the Pacific went all the way with it. But Band of Brothers does a better job at defining the characters and binding them together into one series. I like how most of the episodes jump from characters that you know nothing about in the company. And at the beginning of every Band of Brothers episode, they briefly interview the real men of Easy Company, the real men in the show. The Pacific didn't do that, mainly because all of the men in it are dead. When it comes to these two series, I guess I like Band of Brothers more because just the European theater is more interesting to me. But then I watch the Pacific, I can't decide. But for right now, I'm going to say that Band of Brothers is the better movie.
I cherish the memories of a question my grandson asked me the other day. When he said, "Grandpa, were you a hero in the war?" Grandpa said no. But I served in a company of heroes.